For the longest time, people have looked at podcasting as something that's very difficult to monetize. Until now. I have a podcast that has generated over $30,000 in the last 12 months, while never having to record an episode myself. So for me, the episodes are fully passive. In this video, I'm going over the best methods to monetize a podcast. So generally, podcasters have three main revenue sources. I'm going to break them down one by one and then let you know how you can get started with them yourself. The third way that I'm going to talk about is actually OP. It's a pretty new thing in the podcasting industry and I haven't heard anyone talk about it on YouTube, so stick around to that. Have you ever encountered any fans of a show or YouTube channel, podcast, whatever, that would want less content? Well, I don't think I have. Because people always want more content to consume. So just give the people what they want. For $5 a month. That's right, you'd be surprised about how many fans would be thrilled to get some exclusive content for a couple of bucks a month. So you can start a Patreon and upload some exclusive content over there. Combine that with some other offers like ad-free listening, a private Discord community, behind the scenes content, exclusive merch drops, and you can start earning some pretty good pocket money.
A quick side note here, Patreon just uploaded this onto their Twitter. So they are apparently joining forces with Spotify. So this means that the integration between Spotify and Patreon is probably going to be pretty seamless from now on. We have to see what sort of features that they release, but overall this is very good news for podcasters.
So we did this on my podcast. We uploaded 2 episodes per week that was publicly available. And then we uploaded 1 extra episode per week on Patreon. In addition to that, they could also listen to every episode without any ads. But this year we decided to stop the Patreon exclusive episodes. So we were only making $100 to $200 per month from our Patreon. So for our monetizing strategy, this wasn't really the best option. But once we saw the opportunity of the third method that I'm going to talk about in this video, then we just decided to go all in on that instead.
Ooh, I like your cut, G.
But before we go into the third method on how to make money with a podcast, we of course have to go over the second one, which is also a very good option. If you have listened or watched any podcast ever, you have probably heard an ad, or more like 1,000 ads,
babble,
that are read by the host of the show.
Prove your pronunciation.
And the reason you have heard so many ads on podcasts, it's because for the longest time this has been the main way to monetize podcasts. And the thing with host-read podcast ads is that you have probably heard an ad for the same company on all podcasts at the same time.
This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens.
Athletic Greens.
AthleticGreens.com.
AthleticGreens.com.
Brought to you by Athletic Greens.
Because when a business wants to run an ad on a podcast, they don't reach out to all podcasters individually and negotiate a deal with all of the different podcasters at the same time. They go to a podcast ad marketplace or agency who acts like a middleman between the advertisers and the podcasters. So with my podcast, we're working with an agency or marketplace called Gumball.fm, and we have gotten the majority of our ads through them. There are also a couple of podcast hosting platforms that are also helping podcasters secure host-read ads. If you don't know what a podcast hosting platform is, in podcasting it works like when you have recorded your episode that you want to publish to Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, whatever. You don't go to all of those platforms individually and upload your episode. You actually go to a podcasting host, you upload the episode to your host, and the host then distributes the episode onto all platforms. Hosting platforms like Acast, Audioboom, and Podbean has their own ads marketplaces. The industry standard RPM for a podcast mid-roll ad is $25, meaning on average you should earn about $25 for every 1,000 downloads, which is honestly really good. But let me tell you about one of the best things that you can do with a podcast ad. Let's say that you have a decently sized podcast with 10,000 downloads per episode. Then you would think that you could get $250 per ad spot, right? Wrong, you can actually earn way more than that. Let me try to explain this to you without getting too technical. So let's say that you have a podcast and you secure an ad spot from an advertiser. You go ahead and record the episode and bake the ad into the episode, so it's in the actual episode file. Then that ad will be on that specific episode for the rest of time, right? But there's this thing called Dynamically Inserted Ads, meaning that when you record an ad, you upload it to your hosting platform, and the hosting platform can then add the advertisement into every single episode in your catalog. Just a side note, Dynamically Inserted Ads is not a feature that every podcast hosting platform has, so make sure you check out all the features of a hosting platforms before you start. But you can always switch hosting platforms, you don't have to stick with the one that you initially started with. So last week we got a total of 51,000 downloads. But if we go onto the episode report, you can see that we uploaded 5 episodes last week, and in that period these episodes has generated 23,000 downloads. So that means that the remaining 27,000 downloads is from episodes that are older. So with a CPM of $25, we would leave $600 every week on the table if we didn't use dynamically inserted ads. However, that would only be the case if we had a 100% fill rate, meaning that we always have a new sponsor lined up for the next week. But that is sadly not the case for our podcast. We have around a 50% fill rate, meaning that we have ads lined up for only half of every month. And that was previously the hardest thing about monetizing a podcast, having to constantly look for new sponsors, and if you ever one month didn't have a sponsor lined up, then you wouldn't have any money coming in at all. What if I told you that there's a way to get near 100% fill rate even if you don't have any host-read ad sponsorships lined up? Imagine there being a robust monetization system, sort of like YouTube has, but it would be for podcasters. And it would have a $12 RPM on average. Well, there is a thing like that. And it's called the Spotify Audience Network. It's game-changing for podcasters, and nobody is talking about it. The Spotify Audience Network is sort of the same thing as Google AdSense. Like how advertisers are buying ad spots through Google AdSense, and then Google distributes it across multiple YouTube channels, and the YouTuber doesn't have to lift a finger. It's basically like that, but instead of the advertisers buying through Google, they are buying the ads from Spotify. So we have been a part of the Spotify Audience Network since the summer of 2022, and since that I calculated that the average RPM was $12, which is insane. Compare that to like a YouTube gaming channel that gets like $2 or $3 RPMs. And also think about how much more competitive that is than a podcast. And okay, I know what you're thinking, Mehto, that's cool and all, but how can I do this myself? And what's the catch? Well, it depends on how you look at it. I don't personally think this is a catch, but since all of this is very new, like the information and everything is a bit unclear at the moment. So of course, like the YouTube monetization program, the Spotify Audience Network also has a requirement of how many viewers you need to be accepted into the program. So for YouTube, that is 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 public watch hours. Spotify actually doesn't specify how many downloads you need to get in. So that is for sure a bit annoying. When I applied for it, we had around 8,000 or 9,000 downloads per episode. So if you have at least that, then I'm sure you would get in, but I don't actually know where the threshold is. And to even apply for the Spotify Audience Network, your podcast needs to be hosted with either Megaphone or Anchor. Right as I was editing this video, Spotify releases this. Introducing the new Spotify for podcasters. Anchor is now Spotify for podcasters. So yeah, there's no Anchor.fm anymore. Anchor changed name to Spotify for podcasters. So in this video moving forward, when I'm talking about Anchor, I'm actually talking about the new Spotify for podcasters. I mean, this is exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying that everything is so unclear in the podcasting industry. You would think that podcasting is pretty old, but actually it's just now ramping up. So that's why everything is constantly changing, evolving. So while it may be confusing, I think also this is probably the best time to get into podcasting if you have thought about it before. So yeah, back to the video. Both Anchor and Megaphone are actually owned by Spotify. So that is of course why it's only available for those two. My show is hosted on Megaphone, but recently for some reason they raised the bar to be eligible to be hosted on Megaphone. So now you actually need 20,000 downloads per episode minimum to be hosted with Megaphone. And that's pretty weird because we have like half of that. But the good news is that Anchor is available to everybody. So if you don't have 20,000 downloads per episode, then just go with Anchor. Anchor is also a very good hosting platform and they have a lot of different features like dynamically inserted ads. So overall, I think Anchor is a very good choice. So once your podcast is hosted with either Anchor or Megaphone, you can then apply for the Spotify Audience Network program. But even more good news to you. The Spotify Audience Network isn't the only automatic ad marketplace. There are also other hosting platforms that have similar features. Like for example, Acast also have a similar feature that I've heard really good things about. And Acast helps you with both host-read ads and have a marketplace for the automatic ads. So maybe if you aren't eligible for the Spotify Audience Network, you can still utilize the same sort of ad technology with other hosting platforms, such as Acast. With the rollout of monetization tools like this, do you think that more people will test out podcasting or maybe start an automated podcast like I have? If you want to know more about automated podcasts, check out this video right here.